Born in 624 during the height of the Tang Dynasty, Wu Zetian entered a world structured to silence women. Yet her upbringing in a prosperous merchant household allowed her access to literacy, political awareness, and classical education that most girls of her era never received. From an early age, she learned that knowledge could function as leverage in a society where formal authority was denied to her gender. At 14, she was summoned to the Imperial palace as a concubine to Emperor Changzong, entering a system designed not for romance but for order, hierarchy, and reproduction of political legitimacy. The palace functioned like a closed administrative ecosystem in which rank determined visibility, and visibility determined survival. Wu's early years there were quiet but not passive. She read, observed, memorized faces, alliances, gestures, and silences, developing an acute awareness of how influence actually circulated. When Changzong died, palace protocol forced childless concubines into monastic retirement, and Wu was sent to a convent, effectively erased from political life. Yet she maintained connections and reputation, and years later she returned to court, becoming consort to Changzong's son Emperor Gaozong, a move that scandalized traditionalists but demonstrated her ability to navigate structures others assumed fixed. As Gaozong's health declined due to chronic illness, Wu increasingly handled memorials, appointments, and diplomatic correspondence, gradually transforming from consort to co-ruler in practice. Rivals disappeared not through open violence but through investigations, accusations, and procedural removals that kept the court outwardly stable while shifting internal loyalties. By 690, she formalized what already existed, proclaiming herself emperor and founding the Zhou Dynasty, interrupting Tang rule and becoming the only woman in Chinese history to reign as sovereign in her own name. Her administration strengthened the examination system, encouraged provincial reporting, reduced aristocratic monopolies on office, and promoted capable officials regardless of family pedigree, creating a more centralized and merit-driven state that many later Tang rulers quietly preserved even after denouncing her. She also used Buddhism to legitimize her authority, sponsoring temples, texts, and prophecies presenting her rule as cosmically sanctioned, thereby counterbalancing ideological resistance from scholars trained in classical orthodoxy. Yet perhaps her most radical insight lay in understanding that imperial power did not flow only through decrees, but through proximity and information. Emperors before her had relied on harems of women whose families formed political alliances and whose presence allowed constant monitoring of court factions. Wu redirected this mechanism by assembling a circle of male attendants trained not merely for companionship, but for observation, interpretation, and communication. Later writers would sensationalize this network, but functionally it operated as a court intelligence and access system embedded within palace life. Among those who rose early was Zhu Huyi, originally a commoner elevated through patronage and ordained as a monk to legitimize his presence within a Buddhist political framework. He oversaw temple construction, ceremonial projects, and occasionally administrative missions, illustrating how religious symbolism and political authority intertwined under Wu's rule. His eventual downfall after arrogance and conflict showed that closeness to the throne did not equal immunity. Others survived by remaining discreet, but the most influential later figures were Zhang Yizhi and Zhang Changzong, introduced through elite circles and possibly supported by Princess Taiping, Wu's politically astute daughter who herself would later become a major force in Tang's succession struggles. The brothers became intermediaries controlling audiences, drafting decrees, and filtering access to the empress, effectively forming a gatekeeping layer between ruler and bureaucracy. This concentration of influence alarmed ministers who viewed it as both political distortion and moral transgression. Yet their efficiency also demonstrated how Wu's model of rule relied on flexible networks rather than rigid tradition. Beyond court management, Wu expanded agricultural registers, supported tax reforms, and invested in granary systems intended to stabilize prices during famine years, measures that strengthened state resilience and reduced regional volatility. Trade routes linking the capital with frontier regions were maintained, and communication lines improved, allowing faster relay of intelligence from provinces. The imperial capital at Chang'an functioned during her reign as one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world, hosting merchants, diplomats, monks, and scholars from across Asia. And Wu's administration encouraged this diversity because it reinforced imperial prestige and economic flow. She also promoted the compilation of histories and encyclopedic works, understanding that control of narrative could legitimize authority as much as military success. Her court rituals blended tradition with innovation, incorporating symbolic performances that subtly presented her rule as continuation rather than rupture, even while her position as female emperor challenged precedent. As she aged and illness reduced her ability to appear publicly, reliance on trusted intermediaries deepened, allowing the Zhang brothers' authority to expand until they seemed inseparable from the functioning of the state itself. Opposition formed quietly among generals and senior officials who believed stability required restoration of Tang lineage rule. In 705, a carefully coordinated palace coup removed the brothers and forced Wu to abdicate, placing her son Emperor Changzong back on the throne. Wu was relocated to a secondary residence and died soon afterward, ending a reign that had lasted decades and reshaped imperial administration. Her political removal was swift, but the rewriting of her reputation proved more enduring. Tang historians, seeking to legitimize restored male rule, reframed her policies as excess, her intelligence networks as moral corruption, and her court as scandal rather than governance. Over centuries, the image hardened, especially in later historical periods such as the Song Dynasty, when scholars emphasized moral didacticism and used her story to reinforce orthodox gender hierarchies. Yet archaeological discoveries, inscriptions, and administrative records reveal a more complex portrait. A ruler who expanded opportunity within bureaucracy, maintained territorial stability, strengthened fiscal systems, and governed effectively across a vast empire. Her burial site near Luoyang includes the famous blank stele, a monument without inscription often interpreted as either humility or defiance, allowing posterity to judge her without official narrative imposed upon the stone. Nearby stands the historic White Horse Temple, symbolizing the religious legitimacy she cultivated throughout her reign and the cultural network she leveraged to reinforce sovereignty. The absence of text on her tomb contrasts with the abundance of later commentary about her life, reminding historians that memory can be shaped as much by politics as by fact. Wu Zetian's story ultimately reveals how authority functions beyond gender when institutions permit it, how administrative innovation can outlast political legitimacy, and how historical narratives often reflect the anxieties of those who record them more than the realities of those they describe, leaving her legacy suspended between ruler, reformer, usurper, and symbol of the enduring tension between power and the stories societies choose to tell about it.